The system updates or updates to the AirMod modeling system. It's not just AirMod, but AirMed as well. And then go into a little bit of detail on some other draft guidance that EPA proposed, which they'll also be making comments on, having to do with background concentrations, specifically as it relates to doing National Ambient Air Quality Standard or NAAQS modeling. So as far as the history of this, if you actually go into the Federal Clean Air Act, and look in Section 320 of it, it says that, quote, not later than 6 months after August 7th, 1977, and at least every 3 years thereafter, the administrator shall conduct a conference on air quality modeling. In conducting such a conference, special attention shall be given to appropriate modeling necessary for carrying out Part C of Subchapter I, which relates to PSD permitting. So it is literally required by law that the EPA hold this conference every 3 years, or roughly every 3 years. And I say that because the last conference that they held, the 12th modeling conference, was held back in October of 2019, and then this one, the 13th conference, was held November of 2023. So 4 years difference, but they do make the effort to try to do this within the every 3 year span as required by law. So this conference, as it was related to rulemaking, was an official public forum, meaning that all the comments, all the presentations were recorded and transcribed for the public record. And presenters and commenters were then required to verbally identify themselves and who they represented when they went up to speak at the podium. The EPA hearing officer, the one who presided over the conference, was George Bridgers from the Air Modeling Group at EPA. And if you want to get a little more detail about what all was presented, because I'm not going to mention everything that was brought up, but if you want to do that, you can look at the agenda along with the presentations at this link right here. Let me see if I can do a quick click to show you what it looks like. There we go. So this is the original agenda, and you'll see that the titles are highlighted in blue. These are now hyperlinks. They'll take you to the actual presentations. So I believe that Leslie is going to be putting these into the chat box if you want to copy it down and find it later. You can also get to this if you go to EPA's SCRAM website. The homepage, I think you scroll down a little ways and there'll be the link to the conference, which will have this agenda as well. So because EPA's guideline air quality models, the GAQM or the guideline, is Appendix A to 40 CFR 51, which is air quality rules. If you update it or change it, it requires formal federal rulemaking. So in short, rulemaking involves EPA floating a proposed rule, or in this case, a proposed change to the guideline, followed by a public comment period, where EPA then will go through and respond to the public comments, possibly making changes to the proposal, do the public comments, and then promulgate or sign the final rule, where then it becomes effective. I think it's like 30 days after that. So this guideline proposal was released on October the 12th of this year. And this is a link to the actual proposal. Again, I believe Leslie's going to put this in the chat box if she hasn't already, if you want to go to it yourself. And this just a shot out of the actual Federal Register notice where EPA said We're wanting to update Appendix W to 40 CFR 51, the guideline air quality models. And this is also what it looks like, just a blow up of it. So EPA posts the rule in October. The comment period is now going to run until December 22nd of 2023, a couple of weeks from now. If you want to comment on the proposal, you can post your comments to the federal docket. You have to give it the ID for the rulemaking so that EPA or the federal government knows who you're talking about. And so that ID is EPA-HQ-OAR-2022-0872. There was actually a question asked at the conference about why does this say 2022 and not 2023? And the answer that we were given was that the whole process actually started in 2022. And when the process starts is when you're given your docket ID. And again, here's another link. If I click it, and Leslie should have this in the chat box as well. This just is regulations.gov, and this is where you can go to upload your comments. I believe if you look at the presentations in the agenda, there's one that talks about how to provide comments, so you can submit them electronically. You can, I think, send a letter or snail mail to EPA. And if you're so inclined, you can actually go to the office in Washington, D.C. and submit it in person if you wanted to do that. So EPA's plan is to receive all the comments, prepare responses and post those, and have the final guideline update signed and promulgated prior to November of 2024. And the reason for that is when we went through this back in 2016, the rule was signed, I believe, right after the presidential election. And what ended up happening was that the final approval ended up being delayed from, I think, January to May. And so EPA would like to, if at all possible, have all their work done and have it finalized before any presidential election. So talking about the actual proposal that EPA has floated off, it consists of several elements shown here, and I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail. So EPA is proposing to add 3 new formulation options to the AirMod system. They also note that there's going to be some new alpha options in AirMod. There's going to be a refinement to the recommendations regarding determining background concentrations when you're doing NACS modeling, which I mentioned at the top, including this new draft guidance. And then kind of one of the odd things is that Appendix A in Appendix W, or the guideline, which is the list of preferred dispersion models, is now going to become Addendum A. And this is due to Federal Register style requirements. You can't have an appendix to an appendix. And so that's why Appendix A will now become Addendum A. Clear as mud, right? This proposal will also include fixing up some minor typographical errors that were in the 2017 version and updating and fixing some web links that are inside of it that are either broken or otherwise out of date that need to be updated. So talking about the new AirMod formulation options, the first one is the incorporation of the Coupled Ocean Atmosphere Response Experiment, or CORE, algorithms into AirMet. And with that going into AirMet, it now allows AirMet to be used to process meteorological data involving offshore over water boundary layer conditions. What happens? AirMet was originally designed for, hey, the world only happens uh, onshore, on dry land. But as you get more and more into things like modeling for wind farms or offshore platforms, the meteorology is a little different with that, and this core algorithm will help you be able to with core, you'll be able to use it with overwater observations like from platforms or buoys, or with prognostic meteorology, something that might come out of the mesoscale model interface, MMIF. So historically, there was an alternative model formulation called air core, which used the core overwater algorithms, and that was approved by EPA in several model clearinghouse cases. And sort of, if you were watching the room, as it were, and you kept noticing that, oh, hey, EPA has approved another air core application and another air core application, you could kind of get the hint that, oh, maybe they're getting to the point where they want to make this a regulatory tool. And in this proposal, that would be that. AirMet with core would then supersede air core and have regulatory status. So right now, though, if you are running AirMod over water and you're using this AirMet core combination, you still have to invoke the beta keyword in AirMod. Um, that will change when the rules are approved, and when you get to the 2024 version of AirMod, you won't have to do that anymore. Option number two, EPA proposes adding in something called the Generic Reaction Set Method, or GRSM, as a new Tier 3 screening technique for modeling NO2. So GRSM, which is currently beta, would achieve regulatory status just like OLM and just like PVMRM. Like both of those, GRSM uses ambient ozone data to calculate the conversion of NO to NO2. It also uses hourly observations of NOx to determine the photolysis of NO2 to NO and odd oxygen. Generally, if you obviously ozone limiting method and plume volume molar ratio method, we were only concerned about how much of that NO could be converted to NO2. But in reality, there's a reverse reaction too, where ultraviolet radiation photolyzes NO2 to NO and odd oxygen. After GRSM had been put into AirMod, there had been some more research done, and a new version came out in late 2022. And with this new version of GRSM, it actually showed improved model performance. So I think all of these will give you conservative answers, but maybe GRSM is not as conservative. And the final formulation option is the addition of R-line as a mobile source type for regulatory modeling of mobile sources, i.e. line sources too. So this is based upon work that was done between EPA and the Federal Highway Administration. And basically R-line is going to be put into AirMod. And so in addition to the area sources, line sources, and volume sources, you can now use R-line as a method for modeling mobile sources or line sources. Excuse me. R-line was originally put into AirMod version 19191 as a beta option. There's obviously been quite a bit of testing since then. One item that was pointed out to PM10 or PM2.5 hotspot modeling, please make sure you follow EPA's guidance on that. The point being that R-line can use elevated terrain, base elevations, and what have you. EPA's hotspot guidance says assume flat terrain. So that's just the caveat that was put out there if you wanted to use R line for the hotspot approach. Um, so if the uh, guideline rulemaking is finalized, promulgated, the new formulations will go from beta options to regulatory options in AirMod and AirMet, meaning that you don't have to do any kind of alternative model demonstration anymore, or have any other requirement for approval by EPA in order to use them. And as I think I mentioned, the new formulations will then be incorporated as new regulatory options in EPA's 2024 release of AirMod. No idea at this point when that will actually occur, if it will occur in the summertime or after the rule is finalized. The next thing that came out in the Federal Register notice is this listing of some new alpha options for AirMod. If you recall, within AirMod, you sort of have a paradigm of three levels of acceptability for an option in AirMod. One is regulatory, which means that it's been vetted, tested, and can be used in air permitting. The next is beta options, which are those that have been proposed. They've been tested. They're not quite ready for regulatory prime time yet, but they can be used with going through the alternative model demonstration approach. And then the first step is alpha options. So these are things that are research grade techniques that go into the model. Somebody, proposed them, the EPA put them in the code, and people can sit down and test them to see how they work. And then hopefully, if they gain more experience, how the model's behaving, then maybe it becomes a beta option and eventually becomes a regulatory option. So in addition to the current alpha options in AirMod, for example, low wind, R-Line XT, platform, etc., EPA is putting in three new alpha options in the current version of AirMod 23132. The first is an aircraft plume rise module for area and volume sources, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a second. Adding plume meander to area source types, such as rectangular area, area polygon, area circle, and line source types. And the third is the highly buoyant plume mode. And again, these are alpha options. They're for research and development only. Testing, you cannot use these for any kind of regulatory permit modeling. So let's talk about aircraft plume rise. The Federal Aviation Administration has a program called Aviation Environmental Design Tools, AEDT. Gotta love the acronyms. And AEDT uses AirMod, and it is used in Clean Air Act general conformity analyses, SIP planning, attainment demonstrations, and so forth. Because you have to account for the emissions from your aircraft or aircraft and airport for conformity purposes. So this plume rise module for aircraft, and it only applies to area and volume sources, looks at things like the fuel burn rate, the aircraft thrust, aircraft speed, the air fuel ratio, the bypass ratio, the rated power, and the landing and takeoff angle. So you put all of that in there, and this module calculates therefore, how high your aircraft area or volume source is going to rise before you start having dispersion. So again, this is an alpha option. It's at the point where you're testing it. Second one, area source meander, is actually a new keyword, area MNDR, and this is now applied to all sources that use the area source algorithm, that integrated line source approach. So this is rectangular area sources, or area polygon sources, area circle sources, and line sources. And this meander approach is the same as what is used for both point and volume sources. But it's only going to compute the meander for downwind receptors. The increase in computer time kind of obviates the need or the want to look at all receptors, just the downwind receptors. And finally, the highly buoyant plume module was added to address the case where a source emits a highly buoyant plume that's released into the mixed layer, the boundary layer of the atmosphere, and a part of that plume punches through the top of the mixed layer during daytime convective conditions. So this is just a diagram, a schematic that was included with the comments from the AWMA Air Pollution Modeling Meteorology Group that just shows, whoops. Here you have a stack. You have your direct plume material. Here's your mixing height. Some of it's starting to be reflected here, but some of it also punches aloft. So this is the penetrated plume portion. Again, this is alpha. It's still being tested. And so it cannot be used for regulatory air permitting. The next thing to talk about is the background concentration guidance. So along with the changes to the guideline air quality models, EPA has released a new draft guidance document relating to how to assess or determine background air quality for use in NAAQS modeling demonstrations. And it's just right now it's just called the Draft Guidance on Developing Background Concentrations for Use in Modeling Demonstrations. So if you are familiar with the original guideline air quality models, Section 8 talks about this, and um, the modeler would then look at trying to figure out what nearby sources need to be included in the cumulative NAAQS modeling, which ones are explicitly modeled. And the way that you did that was determine if such nearby sources would cause a, quote, significant concentration gradient in the vicinity of the proposed source. And the problem with that is it's not really clearly defined in the guidance what that means or how to do it. And apparently different permitting authorities interpreted it differently. And so you sort of had a hodgepodge of how to do this, and it caused headache and frustrations for modelers. The new draft guidance removes this dependence on a significant concentration gradient. Thank goodness. The new guidance shifts to looking at available ambient air data, as well as possibly any pre-existing modeling that's out there. So if you're looking at the ambient data, some of the questions you have to consider are, first of all, is there a monitor nearby to my proposed source? And I know in the past, nearby has been interpreted as less than 10 kilometers. And I got to be honest, I haven't read through the whole draft guidance yet, so I don't know if that is still the magic number or if there is some sort of a professional judgment that comes into play in terms of like, is that monitor applicable to where I want to locate? But otherwise, you ask the question, well, what monitors are out there? And how does their spatial compatibility, such as the terrain, the meteorology, the emissions around them, so forth, how does that compare to terrain, meteorology, and emissions density around my proposed source? And therefore, would the monitoring data be considered representative of the air around the proposed source? Now, as far as determining which sources to explicitly model, which is sort of the second half of this, the focus is on sources that are not represented by the selected ambient monitoring data, either spatially or temporally. In other words, if I am doing modeling in South Louisiana and I've got a monitor in Denver, Colorado, that's spatially not going to be the same. from a terrain standpoint, nor from a meteorological standpoint. Temporally, I think you can look at that in terms of, well, I'm modeling the years 2018 through 2022, but I only have monitoring data that goes up to 2016. Well, then that I can't use that because the monitoring data and the meteorological data have to be the same time frame. So first of all, you'll look at the sources that are not represented by the monitoring data set. You may then have to perform some additional quantitative assessment to understand the overlap of what's going on at the nearby monitor and the project sources impacts. In other words, well, what's the emissions density around the monitor versus the emissions density of what's nearby my source? And again, maybe it's everything within 10 kilometers. So one thing that I would like to point out here is that if you use our AirMod Wizard software, there's actually a built-in feature where you can go in and tell it, okay, I have a monitoring station here. Show me all the national emissions inventory sources that are within 10 kilometers of that source, and sum up that total, and then do the same thing for my proposed source and sum up that, and make an argument that, well, what is being monitored, or the emissions reflected at the monitor are greater than what you would expect to see around the proposed source. So you have that sort of that built-in conservatism, and that is another way to assess the representativeness of the monitoring data versus the proposed source data. So just like the guideline air quality models rule, the deadline for comments on this draft guidance is also December 22nd of this month. And I don't know if I mentioned this at the top, but that is the current deadline date. It is, not without precedent that EPA finds themselves maybe having to extend the deadlines for comments. And so if you get close to December 22nd and all of a sudden you see something on Scram that says, oh, the deadline's been extended, that won't be a surprise. It's happened in the past. It could happen here, but I'm not going to speculate one way or the other. And with that, that's all that I had to share with you today. Again, did not cover everything that was presented at the conference, and I will note that on the attendee list, I did see several names that were at the conference with me. So if I misspoke, or if there's something that you think that we should also be mentioning, feel free.
Thank you, James. This is Leslie again. That was a lot of kind of complicated information distilled down into its hopefully most critical pieces. We did get one question during the chat. If you have more questions that have come up, please feel free to enter them into the chat now, or in just a minute, we'll go ahead and just open it up. You can just unmute yourself. So a question from Dave Nolhoff says, on a side note, has EPA given air surface the okay to be a regulatory component of the AirMod modeling system? Is that something that was discussed at all? It seems so weird to me that air surface still isn't officially regulatory.
Yeah, it is a weird thing, and that was not specifically addressed. The only thing that was brought up about air surface, and this came directly from Clint Tillerson of EPA, is that the current version of air surface supposedly only can read 2016 data, and then the data sets prior to that. Since then, the NLCD or MRLC, whatever acronym they are, they have come out with a 2019 data set and a 2021 data set, both for land cover, impervious cover, and tree canopy cover. And it turns out, and I think I mentioned this in a modeling tip a couple of months ago. It turns out that the data format for 2021 and 2019 are exactly the same as 2016. And there's no year check in the data file. So if you wanted to run air surface with 2021 data, you can do that. You just sort of spoof it by telling it that it's 2016, but you'll know that it's 2021. I think I talked to somebody at the conference that had been getting some kind of weird pushback from one of the permitting agencies about this. And my response was, well, hey, you just heard it from the man himself that this is totally legit. I don't recall if Clint said that they were going to be updating air surface specifically to have 2019 and 2021 as new keywords, but this is a way to sort of get around that.
Great. So Dave had one more comment, and I kind of have my own question related to that. He just said that the TCQ air dispersion modeling team has been concerned with the difference of the reported actual emissions, the ones that they use to determine their ambient background monitors, between the monitor and the project site. So I think as we're talking about the how to select background concentrations, and then correspondingly how to select your off property sources that would go into a cumulative analysis. That process, like there's some more detail on that process now with the new guidance that's come out. And TCQ has kind of had a plan for that for quite a while, although I don't think it's quite as involved as what's listed in the draft background concentration guidance. Just piggybacking on that comment, I was wondering if you had heard any concerns from anyone about the complexity of the new background concentration guidance. It just looked to me like they wanted to know a lot of different pieces of information about the monitor and your site, and even though the information that they're requesting, like, it made sense as to this will impact what monitors you choose. It was just a lot to do. And then also, once you collect the information, there didn't seem to be a way to like say, oh, because you are, your emissions around your site are X and the emissions around the monitor are Y, you can use this as a representative background or you can't. Like those kind of decisions weren't in there. I don't know. To me, it sounded like it opened up, it's not concentration gradient, but it seemed like just a different can of worms.
Yeah, and I believe there were some comments that came in, I think, from the AWMA folks that said that, hey, this is a great idea that you've gotten away from concentration gradients and you come up with this new guidance, but it would be nice to have a little more prescriptive procedures in there and maybe some more examples. Um, guidance is not procedures. I understand that, but if EPA is sort of switching horses here, it would be nice to sort of let us in to see, okay, well, how did you mean to do this? And that right there, it may be one of those things that the draft guidance gets changed between now and finalization. Maybe EPA does go in and put in some more prescriptive details and some examples. I hope so.
Okay. Thank you. Another question from Arnie. He says, is it known when or if elevated flares are considered to be a highly buoyant plume, part of the beta, or is it a beta option or an alpha option?
It's an alpha option.
It's an alpha option. Okay. Do you know if the elevated flares are part of the HBP formulation?
I don't think so. I'd have to go back and read the presentations, but I got the impression that they were talking about plain old vanilla. Well, I shouldn't say that. Typically vertically exiting stacks, not necessarily flares. That does make sense, but I don't think flares were specifically mentioned.
So just regular, I don't know, point source stack emissions, not fires and not flares.
Yes.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to either write them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask.
Did you say when the new NOx modeling is going to be added to the model to the beast?
Well, okay, so two things. I'll tell you about that. The GRSM option is already in AirMod as a beta option, and you can turn it on using the current version of Beast that we have out right now, Beast 12.09. That's not going to change, right? For the new version of AirMod that just came out, 23132. It's still in there and it's still a beta option. I think your question might be like, when is the new version of Beast coming out that includes AirMod 23132? And it is supposed to come out tomorrow. We'll send out another notice as soon as the new version of Beast comes out. It should be tomorrow, which includes AirMod 23132 and AirMet 23132. You guys can install that, and you won't need a new license key or anything like that. It should work seamlessly with, as long as you currently have Beast installed, the new version should just kind of install on top of it. But as for GRSM, it's beta right now, listed in AirMod, even in 23132. I think James mentioned that maybe they'll probably take that beta flag out in the next release of GRSM, if that's right. Maybe next summer is what we're thinking. No, 23132. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Sorry, Arnie just asked, is version 23132 still considered regulatory, right? It's not draft. No, 23132 is the current version of AirMod. That's the one you pretty much should be using for new projects at this point. No, it's not dependent on the issuance of the draft Appendix W guidance.
And I will point out, this was mentioned at the conference too, when EPA is talking about making updates to AirMod, when they make substantive changes like adding in these three new modules, that does require public notice and a hearing, just like we're doing here. Think of it as what happened in 2005 when they floated out AirMod for the first time. This is a brand new tool. We want to get comments before we finalize it. They can go in and do bug fixes and minor enhancements, but things like new source types or new reaction techniques and so forth, that requires this whole public process.
I have another question from Dave Nolhoff. He says, does your AirMod Wizard tool or does it assess and quantify permit allowable emissions for existing permits authorized in Texas?
No, it only deals with actual emissions reported to NEI.
Yeah, I think what we have right now in there it's an EPA database, it's actual emissions, and it's is it 2017 that's in there? They just released I think we're updating AirMod Wizard at the moment. It should be out, that update should be out in January. And that's going to include whatever the newest set of data is from the EPA NEI, which might be 2020, I think.
It is 2020, yes.
Okay, yeah, so they only do that every 3 years, and because we use Beast, for facilities nationwide, it made more sense for us to use the EPA database instead of TCEQ. And sadly, just on that exact note, TCEQ has trouble accepting the emissions estimates from Wizard because they want you to use what's in stars.
Maybe someday we'll do that.
I know. I would love to have that, but
yeah, I know it's kind of like, well, we could go get stuff from TCEQ. We could go get merge master data from New Mexico with ERIC data from Louisiana. But you end up having to do it for, every state that has an air permitting group, and all of a sudden the available data that goes into Airmod Wizard becomes quite large. And I'd also point out the NEI data just includes actual tonnages from facilities, does not include stack parameters as well.
All right, thanks everyone for attending. We will put a recording of this on our website, and I'll go ahead and send that link out to everyone who's attended. All right, have a great afternoon.